explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton. Right after the ad ran, thousands of people instantly responded. People that wanted to do something great. They wanted to have a purpose. Jesus has called you with the greatest message and the greatest mission in the world, to save people who are perishing and help them live. What's greater than that? And to go as far as you can go, the whole world. And to live a life that is a contradiction of the accusations of the devil. To live a new life as a new creature, to be holy. Well, that's a challenge. That's an adventure. Talk about an adventure. Live like Christ. We got to get involved. People seldom lose their religion by blowout. They usually lose it by a slow leak. Little by little. And then sometimes it's being faithful right where you're at the moment. Staying involved. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said, a glimpse of the next 3 feet of road is more important and useful than a view of the horizon. Are you being faithful where you are right now? Do something. Don't just wait for something later down the road, but what can you do now? You ask, what is the will of God? Well, here's the answer true. The nearest thing that should be done that he can do through you. All of us have been called by the Lord. Some get distracted by money, making of money. Now, money is not evil. It's the love of money that is the root of all evil. But Jesus was pretty clear. He said, a man's life does not consist in the abundance of things that he possesses. And it is harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God than a camel to go through the eye of a needle. There are exceptions in the Bible, but what worries me is everybody I meet wants to be the exception. Yeah, there are some holy, godly, rich people, but they were the exceptions. Abundance, as I said, it can be very dangerous. You know, so for other people, it's not just education or their career or their work. Sometimes it's entertainment becomes a distraction, or sports. People can actually make a religion out of sports. I've traveled to some part of the world that they ought to really have altars to soccer, or what they call football. It's like a religion. If their team wins, they storm the field and riot. If their team loses, they storm the field and riot. And it's just, yeah, how many of you know what I'm talking about? Now, we're a little more self-possessed maybe here in North America, but it's a religion nonetheless for others. Some every Sunday worship at the altar of their favorite sporting event. And now they got, 10 sports channels on cable all lined up next to each other in high definition. They can worship their gods. Somebody once made a comparison between worshiping sports and worshiping God. And it's talking about why I gave up sports. Here are the reasons that they gave up sports. And just see what would happen if we applied this to church. Every time I went, they asked for money. So I gave up sports. The people I sat next to didn't seem friendly. The seats were too hard and not at all comfortable. Some people stopped going to church for those reasons. I went to many games, but the coach never came to visit me. The referees made decisions I just couldn't agree with. The game went into overtime, and I was late getting home. Ever complained his church went into overtime? The band played new songs that weren't my style. It seems the games are always scheduled when I had other things to do. I realized I was sitting next to some hypocrites during the game. They came to talk to their friends and weren't paying attention. I was taken to too many games by my parents when I was growing up. These are the same things people say about church. You realize that? I hate to wait in the traffic jam in the parking lot after the game. If you don't have enough faith to get you to church, friends, are you going to have enough to get you to heaven? And yet these are the kind of things that people say about church, but you never hear people say this about why they gave up sports. They endure all kinds of bad behavior and misconduct because they love it. When we love the Lord, when we love His Word, when we love Jesus, what's going to keep us away? You know, there are people through history that have died on their way to church, and they knew that their lives might be threatened if they went, but it was so important to them, they went. And some have become distracted. I saw another one. I may as well read these together. Excuses that people give for why they don't go to church. What if they applied those excuses to food? How important is that? I never eat anymore because I was forced to eat as a child. People that eat all the time are hypocrites. They're not really hungry. There's so many different kinds of food, I can't decide what to eat, so I quit. I used to eat, but I got bored eating the same thing, so I just stopped eating. I only eat on special occasions like Christmas and Easter and weddings. None of my friends will eat with me. Some people don't go to church because they have no one to go with them. I'll start eating when I get older. I'll fast while I'm young. I don't really have time to eat. Some don't. I don't believe that eating really does anybody any good. It's just a crutch for weak people. The restaurants and grocery stores are only after your money. Now, the reason I share that with you is how important is church in our Christian life for our health? Jesus said, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. The Lord says, I have esteemed the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. Well, I started out talking about a wandering sheep, and I've wandered a little bit just dealing with some of the distractions that get these sheep off track, talking about some of the backsliding that takes place. Well, let's go back to our sheep again. Why would a shepherd go look for one sheep? Now, you know that the Bible begins and ends with sheep. You can read in Genesis, Abel was a keeper of sheep. Goes all the way back. You go to the last chapter of the Bible and you are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. The Bible talks about Jesus as the Lamb that was slain from the foundation of the world. And all the way from Genesis to Revelation, it's talking about shepherds. So it's probably good for us to consider this for just a moment, because Jesus compares us sometimes to wandering sheep. And he is the great shepherd. Why would a shepherd notice that one sheep is missing if he had 100? You know, if you got 100 sheep up on a green hill, can you just look up there and look down and say, oh, I spot one's missing? They all kind of look a dingy white color, and they kind of meld together, and if one sheep's in front of another, it'd be pretty hard to notice that one is missing unless you counted. You know how a lot of people end up missing from our churches? Because we don't ever count. We think, well, that's proud to count. Well, a good shepherd counts his sheep. How else are you going to know one is missing? That's when you run them through that sheep gate. You say, 1, 2, 3, bringing them back into the fold at the end of the day. The shepherd counts them and says, wait a second, let's count again. One is missing. And so the shepherd says, well, 99 out of 100, that's not bad. And I can report to the CEOs that we've got, 99% accuracy. Any of you ever go to Walmart with 5 kids and come out with 4 and say, well, 4 out of 5 isn't bad? Would we think that way? Do you love your children more than the Lord loves his sheep? Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Be honest. Those of you who are parents, have you ever at least temporarily misplaced a child in some public spot? Notice my hand is going up. Matter of fact, it's probably true that at some point, and it might just be the nature of their genes they inherited, I misplaced all of them somewhere along the way. Have you ever noticed that frantic feeling when you turned around and you looked up 1 or 2 aisles in this store and you didn't spot them right away? And then you look a little harder and you say, I really, especially if they're little, and they're just so active and they run, and they somehow manage to slip away, and you start going up and down the aisles, and your pace gets a little faster, and your heart starts beating a little faster, and then comes into your mind all the weird people that are out there, and you can start getting into a virtual panic. I was in a mall one day, and I saw this lady trying to manage a very active little girl. She must have been 2 or 3 years old, and she kept running off. She'd come and get her. She'd run off. She'd come and get her. Kept a pretty good eye on her. And then she got involved with a conversation with a friend. I was sitting there eating at one of these mall courts just watching. And the little girl took off. And by the time the mother turned to look, And it was a very busy mall during a holiday. People's feet and legs everywhere. That little girl just, she didn't even look back. She just was so excited to all the pretty things to look at, she just took off like a shot and disappeared in a sea of humanity. And I saw that mother, she ran around, she came around the corner and she thought their little girl had come back and she didn't, and her whole expression turned to desperation very quickly with all those people and anything that could happen. Does the Lord love his children less than we love ours? How anxious is he that his sheep come home? How anxious is he that you come home? How much did he pay to redeem and to reclaim us? We also, one sheep is important. You notice he's got 99, but one is missing. Notice the value of even one. It tells us that, I just remembered a story in the Bible. How many of you remember when King David got into his forbidden escapade with Bathsheba? I know you weren't there, but you remember the story in the Bible. You remember reading this. And God didn't say anything to him right away. David really wandered big time. And David used to be a shepherd. So many of the Bible heroes were. Moses was a keeper of sheep. Joseph was a keeper of sheep. And David kept his father's flocks. Killed his best friend to take his one wife, and David had a harem. God let several months go by, long enough for the baby to be born and probably under a year of age. Finally, the prophet Nathan comes in and he says to David, you're sitting as judge today. I've got a case I'd like to bring before you. There's a man in the kingdom, and he had many flocks and herds. He was very wealthy. And he had a poor neighbor that shared a fence with him, very poor family, lived in a shack, and they had one ewe lamb. And it was like a child. They bought it when it was little, and they raised it up, and they nursed it by hand, and it even slept in the house with them. It was like a daughter to them. And a visitor came to see the wealthy rancher next door, and as the custom, sometimes when you had an important visitor, you would kill the fatted calf or the fatted mutton and have a feast. And instead of taking one of his own sheep, he took the one lamb of his neighbor, that precious lamb, and he slaughtered his poor neighbor's one family pet when he had flocks and herds. And when David heard that, he was so outraged that probably the veins stood out in his neck, and in fury he said to Nathan and prophet, the man that did this will die. David was thinking back to how much he sacrificed to save his father's sheep. And Nathan said, you're the man. Have we sometimes forgotten the value of one? Jesus would lay down his life for one. I marvel at the story when David went before King Saul and he wanted to fight with Goliath. And King Saul said, you're just a youth, and he's been a soldier ever since his youth. What makes you think that you can take on this giant? And he said, well, when I took care of my father's flocks, one day a bear came and took one lamb. And I went after that bear, and I fought the bear. Now, you know what it says? It doesn't say he killed it with a sling. Some storybooks show it that way, and we illustrate it that way. It's not what it says. It says I took him by the beard. I don't know where a bear's beard is, but he got a hold of him. And it says, I smote him. And that, as if that wasn't enough to put you in the papers, it says, and then a lion came. And I went after the lion, and I not only rescued, I might try and scare it off with some pepper spray, but he killed the lion to rescue one lamb. And I always marvel when I hear that story, and maybe some of you heard me share this before, but it's very vivid for me because our family used to have goats. And we'd actually had a couple of goats and had a little baby, and finally we got down where we had one goat. And I woke up about 5 in the morning, and our whole house shook because the goats actually slept under the house. I lived in a ranch back in the hills, and the whole house just went bang, and the whole house shook. 5 in the morning, still dark out. I woke up, and then I heard Libby, our goat, screaming. It wasn't complaining for food. It was a desperate, and it kept going on. And I woke up, and you're discombobulated when you first wake up, and you're going, what is going on? Then I realized a lion or a bear or something, we have mountain lions up there, Northern California, was dragging Libby off.